Right, so the next thing that we're going to do is some observational drawing. So we've done a mark making page and we've looked at the surface of the shells and we've used mark making to try and express those different textures and patterns and colours that we can see. And now what we're going to do is start to look at observational drawing. But when we do the observational drawing, we're going to put those marks and tones in using that mark making. So first of all, you need to choose your shell. Now I've chosen this one because it's one of my favourites. I really love all the different textures on it. And I've always kind of liked drawing it. And you can choose whichever you want. This is quite a complicated one. So if you're feeling like you want a challenge, then definitely go for this. If you want something slightly easier, then maybe choose one of the kind of fan-shaped shells. They're slightly easier to work from. But you can decide which one you want to use. Now, when you do an observational drawing, you want to fill the piece of paper that you're working on. So we're working in our sketchbooks, which is A4, and we want to make sure that we fill as much of this page as we can, whilst keeping everything to scale and in proportion. So what we do first is we look at our object and we draw ourselves an imaginary line around the outside with our pencil to try and get an idea about what that shape is. So the angle of my shell is giving me a kind of circular, sort of maybe a little bit ovally sort of shape. So I'm going to put that on my piece of paper first. That must always be the first thing that you do. So it's kind of squashed, a slightly squashed circle, not quite an oval, not quite a circle, that I'm going to put on there. Then what I want to do is look at the individual elements of my shell. So I've got this kind of spirally shape that's starting, and that point starts around about there. So I'm going to put that point in. Now I'm marking this in pencil, and that's the medium that you want to use, although we will eventually be moving on and we will be using biro and fine line pens and dip pen and ink, and you can decide which of those you want to use for your shell. So then I'm looking at this spiral, and very lightly I'm just starting to mark that in on the shell, like so. Okay, so I've just marked in a few kind of key features. I think my spacing is pretty good. I'm quite happy with that. Now what I'm going to do is go back and then just start to refine some of those sections that I've drawn in. And just look for the different kind of angles, the different lines, mark in a few more key areas which are going to help me understand the shape of this and how to draw it. Okay, so that's my shell pretty much marked out on my piece of paper. I'm quite happy with that. I think it's got all the different elements in there. And now what I'm going to start to do is use my ink and my fine line pen and my biro and my pencil to start to add in some marks and to pull this drawing together. I'm going to use a rubber just to take out my outside lines, but you should be able to see how I've broadly stuck within that circular shape that I drew myself at the very beginning. So it's very, very important that you put that in first. And just to note that when we're doing the final shell drawing, we're going to use all 4 of those different mediums that we used when we were doing the close-up sections of the shell. Okay, so I've rubbed out most of those lines that I don't want anymore, and now I can start to look and think about what it is I want to put onto the surface of my shell to add in that texture. Now I'm going to start with my lightest medium, which is going to be my pencil, and I'm going to use that to mark in some of these nice surface textures that I can see. And I'm just going to do that using very light lines, just running backwards and forwards across the surface of my shell. So I'm going to build up this texture slowly. Okay, so I've used my pencil to mark in the directional lines and those lightest parts that I can see on my shell. And then I'm going to switch over to my next darkest medium, which is going to be my biro. And I'm going to use my biro to pick out some of those slightly darker tones and some of those mid-tones. Okay, so I've put in my mid-tones now using my biro, and it's highly likely that I'm going to go back and I'm going to revisit those 2 mediums, but I think to start with I'm just going to make sure that I've used all of the ones that I've got, and then when I need to go back and tweak it a little bit later, then I can do that. So now what I'm going to look at is using my ink. Because of the nature of how the dip pen works, this ends up meaning, although the ink itself is darker than a fine line pen, when you use the dip pen to apply it to the surface, it doesn't come out as dark as the pen. So I'm saving the pen for my very darkest areas, and I'm going to use this dip pen to start to put in some of the surface texture that I can see on those nice spiky bits of my shell, bits that I kind of like the most. Okay, so I'm going to leave it there for my dip pen and ink, and then I'm going to move to my pen, which will put in my darkest areas, and then we'll have a look and see where we are and see if there's any bits that we need to go back and work into. Okay, so I've used my pen to put in my darker areas, and now I'm looking at my shell and just seeing if I can work out what else needs to go in. I feel like I can go back with my biro and start to define some areas a little bit more where the one part of the shell meets the other, and we've got some shadow that's being created that's maybe not quite dark enough for my dip pen but does need to be emphasized a bit more, so just around here, and I can use some lines to build that up. Maybe just make the shadow around here a little bit darker. Use my lines, different mark making to show those changes in tone. Okay, so I've worked into it a little bit more with my biro. I feel like I've got some nice mark making in there. It's not finished by any stretch of the imagination, you know, you can continue working into these. You know, as I'm talking I can see areas that I would want to develop, and you know, I could spend another 2 or 3 hours on this drawing in order to get it to a place where I felt like it was looking really strong. I think we've given you guys a couple of lessons, so not quite as much as that, so I wouldn't really want to be finishing this much past where I think you guys can get to. But I think as far as the mark making goes, you know, I haven't used cross hatching. It's been mainly based on lines, some dots, some heavier, darker areas that I've used with the dip pen and ink. But I think overall, that's kind of what I'm hoping you guys can kind of get to, just so I can see that range of material and a range of marks that have been used in your drawing.